recorded and data collected during the recording of a meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. The recording of a meeting may be added to the Council's website. Can I ask that members speak loudly and clearly into their microphones and switch their microphone off after speaking, otherwise remote participants may be able to unhear the next speaker. I'd like to welcome everybody to the virtual Planning and Transport Policy Working Group meeting. I can advise that the following staff are on the call: the Interim Head of Planning Services, Flo Churchill, the Planning Policy Manager, Jill Peat, the Principal Planning Officer, Stuart Watson, and from Democratic Services we have Billy Attaway and Kelly Mackenzie. Are there any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. I have apologies from Councillor Thomas and Councillor Jays, who is substituted by Councillor Woodford.
Okay, lovely.
Mike, I may have to leave a bit early, but I'll stay as long as I can.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Henderson. Okay, are there any declarations of interest? I'm sure I can see everybody. Okay, I see no hands. So, can I ask whether members to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of October as a correct record?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so the following is a Part A report for recommendation to the Policy and Resources Committee. It's a response to an e-petition calling on us to replace trees felled by developers. Can I ask Stuart to introduce this report, please?
Thank you, Mike, and good evening, everyone. So the report before you sets out that the Council received an e-petition that ran from mid-March to mid-April of last year regarding the retention and replacement of trees when determining plan decisions for approval. The main driver behind the petition involves the possible loss of 1,400 trees on the Lady Dane development in Faversham and future potential loss of the remaining trees lining Love Lane. The petitioner's concerns are that those trees lining Love Lane provide both a windbreak and a rural historic feature to the eastern boundary of Faversham. The petitioners also set out the benefits of trees and the problems of their loss regarding surface water flooding and loss to wildlife habitats. The petition concludes by proposing that the Council impose conditions on planning consents that require felled mature trees and hedgerows to be replaced in equal or greater measure. The problem with that is the proposal is a blanket approach, and this in practice is not achievable where trees are not covered by a tree preservation order. So as a result of this, in the report, we set out an alternative approach where the Council will prepare and consult on a tree strategy. The strategy would address the issues raised in the e-petition whilst going further to support wider objectives of biodiversity net gain within the borough and help facilitate better design, quality and placemaking. The strategy would also help align the Council's future plan and decision making with the government's climate change objectives and national planning policy. So to conclude, the report proposes that members note the e-petition and that a tree strategy is to be prepared once the post holder of Principal Urban Design Landscape Officer is filled within the planning policy team. So I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. I do have a lot of sympathy with the petitioners, but at the same time, we know that certain developers just scrub out all the trees before they put the application in. And this wouldn't prevent that, so it is a worrying situation. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I have a lot of sympathy for this. The problem in Flood Lane was, sorry, did I say Flood Lane? I don't mean Flood Lane, do I? Love Lane. The problem in Love Lane was essentially caused by the fact that the developer changed. But it is clear that developers will find their way, if they possibly can, around controls. It may be that we can't do anything about a landowner who chops all the trees down without there being TPOs before a planning application goes in. However, we certainly ought to be able to control things once a planning application has gone in. I don't think it works to say that they must be replaced with mature trees. I mean, you cannot chop down a 30-year-old poplar tree and replace it with a 30-year-old poplar tree. You can replace it with a, let's call it a well-established poplar tree, but I think that's as far as one could go. As regards hedges, of course, they can be replaced with smaller bushes which will grow and then be cut and so on. I do question, though, the very clear statement that says we can't control this unless there are TPOs. We can control it the minute a planning application is made. And I think our tree policy should make that very clear. I also think that we should recognize that the petition says that the replacements must be on the development site and cannot be put anywhere else. I think that's going too far, because we may be able to restore biodiversity and improve the environment with trees or hedging in a nearby but off-site location. So I hope that our policy would include that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Councillor Jackson.
Yes, I think we need to preserve the carbon sink around the major towns of Swale. They're being lost in the thousands because of the houses that are being built, and the council needs to offset the carbon created by building houses by making developers plant new or preserve existing trees, especially along the A2 corridor. And I think it is a worry to residents to see these being removed. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Councillor Gould.
Thank you. I mean, this may partly be going into the next item on the agenda, but I'd understood that there was something in the new NPPF framework about trying to prevent the scrubbing out of land before development takes place, and in terms of setting the biodiversity and again baseline. And I was just wondering whether we could sort of perhaps look at that side of things, obviously making sure it aligns with it, but if possible, go a little bit further than that and actually take into account what the state of the land was like before any removal of trees or other features took place in setting the conditions, as Councillor Henderson said, was for the planning that we can really try and improve. That there should be a gain, not just a net zero balance on the biodiversity. And so I think we need to look at what it was like beforehand. And I just wonder whether anyone could let me know about whether that is something that is in the NPPF coming forward.
Okay, thanks, Alistair. Flo, could you address the first three contributions, please?
Yes, certainly. I've got to try and remember what they were in order now. Councillor Henderson asking that we are commenting about whether we're able to control the scrubbing out of trees once the planning application is with us. The short answer is no, we can't control that unless those trees are subject to a TPO. an application doesn't become subject to conditions until the decision notice is issued. And that really, at the moment, is the only way we have of controlling it, other than imposing TPOs. And that's something that we can look at, but there are resource implications, obviously, for imposing tree preservation orders. So there is that comment. The next comment was about whether we can insist. I'm struggling to remember the actual wording of the question here. It was Councillor Jackson, if you could remind me.
Yes, it was by making developers plant new or preserve existing trees, especially along the A2 corridor.
Well, again, we can do this via conditions attached to planning permissions, and we can certainly look to improve that in line with if we go ahead and adopt a tree strategy. And a tree strategy may well be in place in Swale before the government get round to actually confirming changes to the NPPF. So we can put conditions on planning permissions, but we have to be careful to make sure that those conditions meet the tests of reasonableness. And given that the council has a declared climate emergency, I don't think it would be unreasonable to request that.
Okay, and Alistair's question, or have you covered Alistair's question as well?
Alistair's question was about the NPPF and the changes. Now, I know that Jill's going to cover the changes to the NPPF in the next comment. All I would say to you is I attended virtually a round table with DLUC on the changes to the NPPF late last week. I have no confidence at the moment that we will see those changes incorporated into the NPPF anytime before Christmas.
Okay.
I sincerely hope, Chair, that I'm proved wrong on that one.
Okay. Councillor Bonney.
Thank you. I really wanted to sort of pick up the bit around TPOs, because I understand at the moment we are going through a piece of work where we are digitising TPOs, that there's digitised map available so people can see them. But that piece of work around TPOs, new ones, etc., when we might be able to talk about that, and will that come forward as part of this tree policy? And then I have one other question.
Flo, can you cover that one?
Yes, certainly. I think that it would come forward as part of this tree strategy, and I think it's also worth mentioning that the ideas for the tree strategy were based upon some work that Alison did not long before she died on the tree strategy. So it is very much a kind of a commemoration of the work that she did as well in bringing forward this tree strategy. So we will be looking at that. Yes.
I thought that the database was the tree database.
Sorry.
Was coming forward sooner than that. I thought that was already well underway.
Chair, you're absolutely right. Our tree officer is working through that at the moment. We have Paul Hegley as our tree officer 2 days a week, and he does 3 days a week at Maidstone, or the other way around. And so I will check with him, and if it's something you want to happen, Chair, we can ask him to come to the next meeting to update us on progress on that digitisation project.
Is that something the group would welcome?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I think
Sure.
so then.
Yeah.
Okay, there's an action point.
I have one other question.
Councillor Hunt, do you? No, hang on. Councillor Hunt, you had your hand up. Has your question been answered?
Yeah, that was done by Flo. Thanks.
Okay, Monique.
Okay, so the second bit on following on from that is, where else, through you, Chair, but question I suppose to Flo and the officers, is looking at other councils' best practice. What can we do to reinforce the importance of trees and hedges to make sure they survive through the development process. Have we
Flo?
seen other local authorities bring forward things that could be useful, other tools?
Flo, do we have anything like that?
I will mine my book of contacts with other local authorities. I am aware of some other local authorities. I think Bromley has a particularly good tree strategy. I might be wrong. It certainly did a few years ago, but we can also look at the approach that authorities are taking in their local plans to make sure that we have the policies embedded in the local plan to help enforce the process we're taking. What I can undertake to do is to do a piece of research that sets out the different approaches and put that before members if that's something you would like to see, Chair.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, I've got Monique, Alistair, and everybody's already spoken. Actually, I've got
done.
Monique.
I'm done.
You're done. Okay, so
yeah, thank you.
Alistair, then Mike Henderson, then James Hunt. Alistair.
Yeah, just very briefly. So with the sort of main purpose of the tree strategy to sort of lay down the ground rules for developers so that they know if they did do a lot of damage to trees and to other features, that there would be a reasonable expectation that it would all be put back again in the planning process, because we've stated that in the tree strategy, and whether that would actually carry some weight in making decisions. And so we could argue it's not unreasonable, because look, this is what we said we were going to do.
I think it's partly a matter of evidence, but I do recall a recent appeal where it commented that the site had obviously been quite had rich biodiversity previously, and had obviously been scrubbed out in the recent past. Is there something we can go down on that, Flo?
Chair, we can certainly look at that. I think that everything that the tree strategy would be trying to do would also is sort of encompassed in not only the Environment Act, but the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill in terms of beauty and biodiversity and so on and so forth. But we also have to remember that we'll be under an obligation to have a design code, and we can incorporate it into that design code. I would suggest with the tree strategy that we look at adopting that as supplementary planning guidance, or whatever form the supplementary guidance takes once the changes to the NPPF have been incorporated, because that then gives us the force, if you like, to enforce it.
Okay. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, two of my questions weren't answered. The first was not to use this term mature trees, because I think Swale Council would have a serious problem in buying 30 or 40-year-old trees to plant. The second point was, again, to insist on this improvement in biodiversity, but to allow trees and hedges to be planted not necessarily on the development site.
Okay. Somewhat ironically, through the chair, somewhat ironically, if we were to insist on mature trees, it's likely that those mature trees would not be native species, because no nursery in this country has a supply of 30 or 40-year-old native trees. So I think Councillor Henderson is right in the approach that he's taking, that it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to insist on mature trees as a replacement. The difficulty comes when we are asking developers to do something that is out with the red line of their site. So we have to, in order for a condition to be felt to be reasonable, it has to be relevant, and in order for it to be relevant, it has to apply to the site. So we have to be very careful about ensuring that we don't impose a condition that a developer could then go and appeal, and we would lose that appeal imposition of that condition. So we have to be careful about how we go about wording the tree strategy and potentially using the tree strategy as a basis for collecting Section 106 contributions to look at strategic level projects across the whole of the borough in terms of tree planting. So if Councillor Jackson was saying about along the A2, we might want any development anywhere in the borough to contribute to tree planting along the A2. That's the kind of approach we can look at.
Okay. Thank you.
And Councillor Hunt.
Thanks, Chair. I think there's obviously a lot of work to be done on the strategy, and I think we've sort of gone off a bit of the agenda item of the petition, but I just think as sooner this comes forward, the better with the tree strategy. But I'm not expecting it is going to come forward that quickly. But if things do start moving, I just think we do need to make sure that we include our open spaces team as we discuss this. And I'm not going to name officers, but we do have a really good officer in there that I've had conversations with over trees and what we could be doing in the borough. I just think we need to make sure if it does come to a future meeting that we do include those officers that we've got the expertise with, and make sure all that's fed in. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Hunt. That's a good point. Can you incorporate that, Flo?
We will ensure that happens, yes.
Lovely. So on that basis, can I propose the recommendations?
Read.
Hang on, I think I need a right. So Councillor Henderson has seconded. And everybody in favour? Any objections? I caught you all out, didn't it?
Agreed.
Just
Agreed.
noting anyway.
Agreed.
Noted. Lovely. Okay then. Oh, I have totally lost my sheet. Right, so that's passed. The item 6 is a levelling up regeneration bill, reforms the National Planning Policy Framework consultation. Can I ask Jill to introduce this report, please?
Good evening. Thanks, Chair. Hi everyone. Can you see my screen?
Well, I can, so I guess maybe can.
Yep.
Can you just see one slide, or can you see
just one slide?
just
yeah.
the one slide? Okay,
Just
that's great. Yes, anticipation management and all that.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So the report you've got in front of you relates to the current government consultation on the proposed reforms to national planning policy. And there's two strands to this consultation. Firstly, there's a tracked changes version of the National Planning Policy Framework document that sets out all of the changes that the government are proposing to make. And then next to that, there is a paper that canvasses opinion on what the government's proposed approach to a wider range of proposals are. And these are things that are going to be the subject of further consultation at some point in the future, almost certainly after the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, or the LURB, has got royal assent. The consultation also seeks views on the proposed scope and approach to the preparation of national development management policies, and helpfully sets out the transitional arrangements. Okay, so what I would say about this is it's not a wide-ranging review of the full NPPF. It's really more about incentivising authorities to progress with local plans amid what has certainly been considerable uncertainty. Right, so what's in the consultation? Yep, is that the slide everyone can see? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Okay, so what's in the consultation? So there's those specific changes to the text. The expectation is that the government will take into consideration the consultation responses, but they will move very, very quickly and publish this sort of latest iteration of the NPPF in the spring. Don't know if Flo may want to sort of say more about that sort of later on, but that's the time frame that we're working to. The consultation seeks views on a wider range of proposals, consultation on the finer details of these things have kind of been, you know, the can has been kicked down the road a little bit, but we know it's coming. It sets out an envisaged role for these national development management policies and provides a timeline for transitional arrangements to the new system of plan making. Okay, so what are the immediate priorities? Well, first and foremost, local housing need, which is the number that we use the standard method to calculate. That remains the starting point for determining the housing number in local plans. But there is some softening of the language around that and asks whether or not end users of the NPPF would like a clearer definition of exceptional circumstances that would justify a local planning authority departing from using the standard method. In the consultation version, there is some reference to exceptional circumstances. So what it says is, if building at higher density would be so out of character that it would be harmful to your patch, that could be an exceptional circumstance. Also, local planning authorities with Greenbelt are not required to review their Greenbelt boundaries to deliver their housing need. And another exceptional circumstance is where you've got areas where there's been past oversupply. Okay, so also of note is at the moment we have a requirement to demonstrate a rolling 5-year supply of housing land. And where you have an up-to-date local plan, you don't need to do that. And there is also proposals to remove buffers from your housing land supply calculations. So members may recall at the moment, the government publishes the results of the housing delivery test. And if you score below a certain percentage, you have to apply a 20% buffer. But everybody else has to apply a 5% buffer. So this proposal is no more buffers when you're calculating your housing land supply figures. They're also proposing to make some changes to the housing delivery test itself. So you could be in a position where you haven't delivered your housing number for those previous 3 years, but you might be sitting there with thousands and thousands of planning permissions in the system, so that just haven't been built out. So the idea is that housing delivery is complex. There's some acknowledgement here maybe that it's not always the local authority that are to blame for that lack of delivery. So where you've got those planning permissions, you can use that information to feed into your overall calculation. And also the proposals include measure powers that local planning authorities could use to address where slow build out problems arise. Not relevant to us. I'm not particularly aware of any wind turbines in Swale. I've been racking my brains, but can't think of any, but there are measures in the NPPF to make it more straightforward to replace wind turbines with more modern, more efficient machines, and also to take into consideration or give significant weight to energy efficiency measures through the adaptation of existing buildings. Councillor Gold was talking about this at the previous item. There are ideas around providing greater protection for genuine sort of on-site biodiversity enhancements. So there's no scope for any mischief. And the other immediate priority, which I think is really sort of very timely, given that Botten and Dunkirk have just had a positive referendum result on their neighbourhood plan, is to treat neighbourhood plans in a very similar way to local plans. So the local authority might not have a 5-year housing land supply, but if your neighbourhood plan is less than 5 years from adoption, regardless of what's going on with the borough, the neighbourhood plan area is protected from speculative development. Shall I move on, Chair?
Yep.
Yep, okay. Right, so obviously this is, you know, planning policies in the title of this working group. So obviously I'm going to have a slide on proposals for plan making, and these really are quite significant. There's reinforcement. Of course, you would expect that we are going to continue with a plan-led system. Some of the changes in the tracked changes version of the NPPF is all around placing greater emphasis on beauty and placemaking. Duty to cooperate will be replaced in due course. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have the detail of what it would be replaced with. You'll all remember, of course, that there are currently 4 tests of soundness identified in the NPPF that inspectors use to assess plans. Are they positively prepared? Are they justified? Are they effective? Are they consistent with national policy? The proposal is to do away with the justified test, but again, we don't really know what that's going to look like because there's a whole load of sustainability assessment legislation that sits next to but outside of this process. Plans being prepared under the current system now must be submitted to the Secretary of State for examination by the 30th of June 2025. Any local authorities that miss that deadline have got to prepare new system local plans, and the expectation is that they will be done and dusted from start to finish within 30 months. So your next local plan is adopted, and then 30 months, you've got 30 months to get the next one adopted. SPDs, I know, SPDs, supplementary planning documents, they're going to be replaced with supplementary plans, and the difference is that supplementary plans will have exactly the same weight as the local plans, whereas SPDs were really more about amplifying local plan policy and adding value, but they didn't have as much weight as the plan policy. So that's interesting. Okay, just a little bit really quickly about the National Development Management policies, because actually there isn't a whole lot in there. So the starting point for the government in thinking about National Development Management policy, so this is policies that would apply everywhere, and they would be consistent and completely uniform. So whether it's, you know, Newcastle under Lyme or Newcastle upon Tyne, you've got the same set of national development management policies. And the starting point is looking at the elements of the national planning policy framework that relate specifically to decision taking, and then looking at those common themes and issues, for example, carbon reduction in new developments or allotments, that sort of thing. What other topic areas could be included? Well, residential space standards is one that we thought of, along with air quality, heritage, ecology and flood risk. But of course, these policies would need to be robust, but also flexible where local circumstances would require a sort of a more detailed or slightly different approach. Other issues covered in the consultation is that local planning authorities, as part of their housing needs, they must make sure that they are identifying and delivering through their local plans retirement housing, housing with the care element in care homes. A greater use of planning conditions are required to sort of make sure that details around a scheme's design and materials are much clearer. There's an interesting paragraph in the NPPF about mansard roofs. They are encouraged as an appropriate form of upwards extensions where appropriate, and looking at higher priority being given to the provision of social rent homes above all the other different types of affordable housing products. And just peppered throughout the document, much greater reference to the importance of delivering beauty and placemaking. Okay, so this is my last slide. And this is
a hell of a lot of a response to a consultation, Jill.
Oh, but you know, it doesn't get much more exciting than this. So what do these proposals mean for Swale? So it's a bit of a difficult one because there's an awful lot in there, and on the whole, it's not massively different. It's not massively significant. We're still going to have to use the standard method unless we can demonstrate exceptional circumstances to identify what our housing need is for the local plan. Because we would be progressing with our plan under the transitional arrangements, we would still have to work under the umbrella of duty to cooperate, which means what happens to unmet needs. And a lot of the proposals in the consultation document, actually it's a common sense and it's best practice, and a lot of it is things that we're already doing, but we welcome it all the same. Removal of a buffer for housing land supply calculation, not surprisingly, that's very welcome. And local plans under the transitional arrangements, as they get to set formal stages, they could be required in their housing land supply position statement to demonstrate that they had a 4-year housing land supply rather than the 5 years. Yeah, it's a really interesting one because there is a lot of, they say that the devil's in the detail, and there is a lot of detail missing. But whether or not, this all sort of comes forward in the spring as promised, and we're able to use that as we progress with our local plan, that's the hope, and the expectation is that with the consultation on the other elements, we'll be involved with that. So in essence, there's a set of questions that consultees are encouraged to respond to. There are draft responses to this in the appendix to the report. Our approach has been to acknowledge what's positive about the proposals and to provide ideas and solutions where the detail is a little bit lacking or where we have concerns around how things might work in practice. And I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the recommendation is that we note the responses to the consultation. Any questions? About time some people can put some hands up. Alistair. Councillor Gould.
I think James beat me to it.
Did he?
Yeah.
This is, you've come up at the top. So, all right, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. I don't mind who goes first, but as I'm here, I'll
Yep.
go over it if that's all. I just obviously we're noting this, but I do think, and hopefully we can have a bit more discussion around it, because obviously it's right, we delegate authority to officers to respond to consultations. But I think something this big, we do need a bit more discussion around it and to go through the responses that we're giving.
Yep.
Generally, I think I sort of do agree with what's what the responses are, but there's a number on there. I've probably got about 8 that I'd like to sort of comment on. I don't know how, Chair, you want to go about doing that with it. You want me to comment now? Or?
Yeah, if I just get my web page to reopen. It would be helpful if you did it number by number. So when you've got a response, we can go to the number and then comment. Oh, we should have the numbers up. Can we put the numbers back up so that when Councillor Hunt mentions them, we can see read which one he's talking about? Lovely. Go ahead, James.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me bring the first one. The first one is number 11. I just think with that one, what is being said here is that as our response saying that local plans should be justified, I'm just wondering what the sort of detail around of why that response has been given. I mean, with government are looking at plans to be justified being removed, but as a council, we're going to be responding saying that it should be justified, and I don't really understand that. So I just wonder if we can have a bit more clarification from officers on why that is being said.
Yep, Jill.
Sorry, I've got too many things open. The concern we had as officers, and if I just pop to the NPPF, can everybody see that? Okay, right. So justified is about having an appropriate strategy, taking into account the reasonable alternatives and based on a proportionate evidence. So for us, having a strategy that's justified means having a strategy where you can sort of you can tell the story, and it's not clear to us as officers how we would be able to achieve that and how we would be able to explain that to our communities and how they would be able to engage with proposals if they weren't justified. So what isn't clear is what is going to be sort of put in its place to make sure that those issues are covered. The other thing is, sitting behind this, there is sustainability appraisal and environmental legislation, where we're still having to go through the same exercise of looking at reasonable alternatives. So if we're still doing all the work, it seems it just seems like there's a bit of a disconnect. I don't know if Flo or Stuart want to sort of say more.
Flo, because I have to admit, I have some sympathy with what Councillor Hunt's saying. It seems that it's who we're justifying it to, and what it's an awful lot of work. What's the purpose? So, if Flo.
Yeah, I think one of the other things I think we need to be conscious of in taking out that bullet point requiring justification also takes out the requirement for an adequate and proportional evidence base. And I can see local plan examinations being caught up in lots of arguments with developers over what is proportionate or not when it comes to evidence. So it would worry me that if that was removed, that we could be spending an awful lot of time at local plan inquiries justifying the evidence that we've brought forward, and it gives another reason for developers to try and challenge that evidence. So that's what I would be concerned about in removing the requirement to have a justified strategy.
You'd still be able to do it. You'd still be able to put your setting the picture and your while you're doing it.
You could have your vision and everything. Yes, Chair, you're absolutely right. But it would, I think, developers would try and prove that any evidence base that we had was not proportionate, and therefore they didn't need to sort of, abide by what our evidence is telling us.
But wouldn't that be part of our policies rather than the need to justify? If we don't have to justify why we put something in, if we don't have to justify the approach that we're taking, isn't it harder for developers to argue against us if we don't have to justify it in the first place?
No, I think it actually makes it easier for them to argue against us if we don't have to justify it, because they can claim that it's not sort of proportionate or reasonable.
But we don't have to be reasonable if we don't. On this, do we?
Well, natural justice requires a reasonable approach. Maybe I'm being over pessimistic here about local plan inquiries, but I would be concerned if we no longer had to justify with a proportionate evidence base, then, Chair, you're very probably right. It might not go the way I'm anticipating it would. So maybe I need to be slightly less pessimistic about the behaviour of developers.
Just that if the government's thinking of taking it out.
Yeah. I think it will be this is one where it will be really interesting to see what other authorities' approaches are on matters.
Do you not discuss this at your secret cabal of chief planners that you have?
We do.
Okay. Good first point, Councillor Hunt. I'm not quite sure where we're going with it yet, but follow up with your second one.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, just coming back on that one still, and I can understand what's being said, but I think if I know officers aren't looking at it politically, but if we're looking at this politically, and that the government are looking at it politically, there is a reason why they are saying that they are going to be removing that. And I think for us, this response is being done by officers, but on behalf of the council. And I think as a council, we need to be considering what this is saying. And I can understand what has been said about the reasoning behind saying it, but I think the way that it's being said could be put in a different way to show that those concerns and what it would mean for the council, and not going straight out and saying that the strategy should be justified. You shouldn't be taking that stance, in my view.
Anybody else got any thought about this? Any other councillors? Alistair, is this on this subject? Okay.
No, I wasn't particularly thinking about this one. But yeah, I would agree that actually, if it means that we don't need to justify in great detail the policies that we put forward, that's an advantage. But if it If it does mean that, I think that's the question that is exercising us here, isn't it?
Yes. Has nobody else got any thoughts about this? Because it is quite important, and right, Richard.
Just on the justified bit, that 11, I think the officers have a point. I think if you don't justify your arguments for doing something, then it gives the developers room to have an argument why they could run roughshod over things. So I think not having that in there would weaken our cases in some case.
Okay, Molly.
Chair, if I could come in, it might help. We could look at change. What we have to bear in mind is that this is an officer response and not, it's exactly the point that's being made, not a political response. But we could actually change our answer on this one to say that there isn't actually enough detail in what's being proposed to understand the implications for the local plan process.
That's said, isn't it?
That might be a good approach. Councillor Hunt, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's better. I think it's just the way that it's not political, but by saying that something should be justified when government is saying it's not, could be seen as political as well. That's what I'm sort of trying to get at as well. It's either a political response or it's not.
Okay, so are we generally happy that we take the more nuanced approach that Flo suggested?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay then. And this council of 4 of us. Councillor Hunt, your next point.
Yeah, thank you. The next one is 18. And the response there is, being asked a question, do you support? The response there is just given a statement, really doesn't actually answer the question. And I think we should be, again, raising that better clarification is needed. I do noted there that it is picked up in 20, so maybe that's really where the detail is coming from. But yeah, just a response. Maybe we do need to be saying yes, just being a bit clearer on that.
Yep, happy to change that. So it says support and then just tidy up the answer.
Yep.
That's fine.
Okay, carry on, Councillor Hunt.
21. I agree with the focus needing to be on the root cause for under delivery. But I just wonder whether it's right to say that the housing delivery test scores should be used for figures in the local plan over 5 years. And I can see why we'd say that, but there needs to be an incentive to have local plans. There's some councils that haven't had plans for absolutely years, and if there was a case that shouldn't be used for plans over 5 years old, you could have councils saying that their plan from the 90s, the numbers still needs that can be used, and just not pushing forward with a local plan. So just considering whether that is right or not.
I think there is now a requirement that a plan will be done every 5 years. So I think the old days of just sitting on an old plan are gone a bit. But Jill?
Thank you, Chair. The message we're trying to get across here is that when we prepare local plans, we have a figure, and that's the annual figure for the plan period. So when things change, and plans are absolutely notorious for taking a long time and being very complex to deliver, of course. But when that number changes and you are potentially faced with a massive uplift Quite often what happens is as an area you're penalised for circumstances that are beyond your control. So it's really about, if we have an agreed number, that should be the number for the years in the plan. So in our case, the 776 figure for bearing fruit would go up to 2031. So all these other sort of plans that are so old, they've gone past their plan period, that wouldn't apply. That number wouldn't automatically roll on. It would just be for the life of that plan, because that's what you're planning for in that time scale. So I don't know, I can see both sides of the argument, but that's our thinking. Thank you.
Okay, Alistair, is it on this?
No, it wasn't on this one.
Okay, do you want to take your hand down until Councillor Hunt's finished? Otherwise I keep thinking you're coming in on Councillor Hunt's.
Sorry, could I come in on that one?
Yeah, if you put your hand up.
Hold on. There you
Councillor Bonney.
So what's this 30 months malarkey? It's not 5 years, is it?
2.5
That's
years.
what they're proposing now.
What,
It's
30 months?
2.5 years.
That's the future local plan turnaround.
Right, okay.
So what do we think on 21? HDT short scores should use the figures in the adopted local plan even if a plan is over 5 years old. I kind of feel that we should stick with what the officer.
You cut out. Can't hear you. Mike?
Hello?
Yeah, couldn't hear you. Cut out.
Yeah, it went. I kind of agree with what the officers have put here. I think that there is so much unpredictability. It does hit back. It does. It's for councils that suffer if HDT scores get changed and that. I think if you've got a plan, you've got it through the examination. You're subject to a review, but we all are. I kind of feel that the officers have got this right, but we don't want to keep changing it. Anybody else got any views on this? Councillor Hunt's querying the answer. Right, Alistair, you put your hand up afresh. I'm thinking it's on this.
Yeah. So I mean,
Good.
it's really, what is the point of the review if the number is it just about the policies then and not the numbers when you have to review the plan, if you're planning for a long way ahead, or is it just to make sure that really that are we effectively saying that the numbers aren't going to change for all of that time?
Well, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? I mean, it is the idiocy of the system when you expect to put a 15, 20-year plan together, but you've got to review it after 5 years, which means that the stuff you put in for the last 10, 15 years, 5 or 10 years, might just be, are just so far off that they have to go through 2 reviews before they even come into play. So it just seems that you're always having to play catch up. You're always having to dance to an external tune. And the HDT is just another part of that tune, which I just feel we shouldn't be encouraging.
I agree.
Councillor Hunt, do you want to come back in response to what I've said? Yeah, who said that?
Monique.
I'll let Councillor Hunt come first.
Yeah, only say I'm not really I'm not really worried either way. It's just good to have a discussion on that. I'm not happy with leaving it. I wouldn't be saying completely change it, but yeah, it's just good to consider that one a bit more, which we've done.
Okay, so we're happy to move on, Monique?
Well, I suppose this is a fairly fundamental thing as a point of principle in this, is I feel that the government has, and I think we should reflect it, is have kind of rode back on what they were saying they were going to do in terms of central numbers.
Well, it's a consultation, so hopefully when they get the responses to the consultation, they'll realise that rolling back, if that's what they're doing, isn't good.
Yeah, and I think we should be quite strong with that, because it's not just our views, but it's that of our communities, which across the board were jumping up and down saying, it's ridiculous, the numbers that have been handed out centrally, and this whole charade around housing delivery test scores is just that, and we should make that clear. That's what it is.
Okay, so we're happy with what the officers have got. Councillor Hunt, your next point.
Okay, the next one was 22, and this is probably more a personal thing, and officers might not even want to respond on this one. So, but it's just the affordable housing with first homes. I think we do need to do more about making sure that affordable homes are affordable. But I think in the response, almost saying there, I wouldn't want basically first homes to disappear. I think it's right that we do, or the government does, what they can to make it more affordable for first-time buyers, and not just for people that are needing affordable housing. So I think removing the requirement that affordable housing, probably I can understand why it would would want to be reviewed, but we want to make sure that they don't get rid of first homes, in my view. But that's just more a personal thing.
Anybody else got any comments on that? Mike?
Sorry, I've muted myself. Well, I think the clear need is, and what I worry about is this terminology. What does this actually mean? Because when you talk about, we're talking about social rent, what does that actually mean? Are we talking about LHA rents, or are we talking about something that's a hybrid in between? I don't really understand what it is that they're referring to. Perhaps the officers might be able to give us some. Do they know?
Bear in mind the question is, do you agree that the government should revise national planning policy to attach more weight to social rent in planning policies and decisions? If yes, do you have any specific suggestions on the best mechanisms for doing this? So in that context,
yes, but
Jill, what's your answer?
Okay, thanks, Chair. So social rent is housing that is rented from a social provider. So it's not affordable rent, it's not a discounted product, it is genuine old school social housing. Then the issue, so I think what's really confusing is that the term affordable housing relates to about half a dozen different products, ranging from shared homes and first homes, and like the whole sort of spectrum. So we know that in our borough the biggest demand is for social rent. So what we're finding sort of on the ground where first homes are concerned is that the viability doesn't stack up to 25%. The best it's likely to get to is around about 19%. And what we're also finding is that if you have a proposal and it's got X number of affordable housing products, and 25% of that has to be first homes. That can knock the remainder below the threshold, so a registered landlord will not touch it.
Shouldn't we be challenging the whole viability margins then, saying that such a high profit margin is unrealistic compared to other businesses?
Can I come back?
Yeah, go on, Molly.
So as I sort of open this can of worms,
James might feel he'd had something to do with it, but carry on.
Well, yeah, he did. Clarify for me what so the first homes is, because I think we all know that what we really want is social rent, and that actually this affordable buy scheme, I'm aware that a lot of that is not necessarily locals buying it, but where people have been given substantial chunks of money by London social landlords, and they have then moved out of London and bought down here using that. And actually what that's not doing is serving our local population, which is what our plans are supposed to be. And we really do need social rent if we want a balanced structure to our communities. What we need is that social rent.
Okay, Richard, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Annex 2 in the glossary of the NPPF recommended changes, it gives a definition of affordable rent is at least 20% below social rent. But the trouble is that it's just, with the house prices being so high, even at 20%, it is unaffordable for the great majority of people. So whether we give an answer to the government saying, yeah, that sounds absolutely fantastic you put there, but in reality on the ground, what you've got there just isn't achievable. Unless we go out and you need to build houses for social rent, otherwise there's a great big section of our community who are disenfranchised. And no matter what we say here, if we can't do that or the government can't do that, you're still going to have a great percentage of people who are disenfranchised. So it doesn't probably answer the question, but it's all right saying affordable, but affordable isn't affordable. Social rent, all right, it says at least 20%, could be 30% below, 40% below, but until firm action's taken, it's going to be a great deal of people who are disadvantaged by words that don't really mean anything. Thank you.
Carol?
Yeah, I agree with what Richard's just said. I mean, canvassing people for going round doors, people want social housing, they want affordable, and on the wages that are paid around our way, nobody could afford to start off in Faversham. They have to be working out of Faversham. You work in a supermarket or something, you're not going to get the wages to afford a mortgage. So we do need the social houses that is controlled more. Because the rent as well, it's about 1,200 on a lot of them a month, and they just can't afford it. That's all.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Alistair, did you want to come back on this?
Yeah, I was just wondering about the definition of affordable. I mean, we're tending it to benchmark it against the market prices, but would it be perhaps more is it worth suggesting a definition of affordable which is benchmarked against average wages for the area, and a percentage of that wage as being the sort of what would be a reasonable level of rent to be counted as affordable, a bit like the living wage really, which doesn't start from what's the minimum we can get away with, but what is enough for someone to live. And if you look at the amount of income that's left over after rent, that's almost a better definition of affordable than just doing it as a percentage terms. And maybe we should be looking more in sort of relating it to wages rather than prices, and whether that's something we can suggest.
Okay, so Jill, having heard these various comments, which are of something of a common theme, What do you take away with regard to the actual question?
Okay, so my takeaway is that we're all on the same page, that we absolutely agree that social rent is a product that we want to deliver more of. I think, just to answer Monique's question about first homes, that they're a relatively new affordable housing product, and I have been, we have been fairly negative in our response here, but that's because our lived experience as officers has shown that it's difficult to deliver, and there are other products that actually historically have worked quite well, like shared ownership. So first homes are open market properties that are sold at a discount, capped at 250,000, and the discount percent of open market is 30%, and joint earnings must not be more than 80,000, and there's something else. Oh, and you need to have a local connection. But that local connection, that is something that's generally, it's open to people with a local connection for 3 months, and then possibly, that can be extended by 6 months. But what we're finding is that the best case scenario is that in Swale, the take up of that would be around 19%. So actually, maybe what we want to say in our response here is that locally we want more flexibility so that we can deliver the sort of a broader range of affordable housing products, with social rent being the priority. Don't know if there's any thoughts. Does that cover it all?
Sounds reasonable.
Does that sound good to people? James?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds much better, because I think just from what Jill was saying, I mean, hopefully others agree with me that the first homes thing is actually a good thing. It's getting local people that could maybe not be able to afford to get on the housing ladder a better opportunity. So being too negative about that, I think, isn't a good thing. So from what Jill's just said there, with how to put it across, is a better way of doing it.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Next one, James.
Okay, I'm nearly there with these. So,
Good.
I'm going to do a couple all together because it's raising the same point. Number 30, the principle of the applicant's past behaviour should be taken into account in decision making. The response of no, I strongly disagree with that. I don't think we should be saying that at all. I do understand with the concerns from officers around it, but taking into account 31 as well, the two options above, I think it would be good if we actually had those options listed as well so we could see them, because they're obviously only on the document. But personally, I agree with option 2, for those that don't know, says that allowing local planning authorities to decline to determine applications submitted by applicants who have demonstrated track records of past irresponsible behaviour prior to the application being considered on its planning merits. Similar to the amendment which has already been made, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, but you get the gist of it. I personally would go with option 2. I think the detail should be given. I think the government do need to be clear on what past behaviour can be taken into account. But as an additional mechanism that they're asking for, it could be to ensure that past wrongs are put right so other applications can proceed. And there's just a lot of cases that probably members know that we have developers come in and don't do things, and there should be ways that we can deal with that through enforcement, but we know that it doesn't happen. And if there is a mechanism that the government are looking to bring in, that we can push developers even harder to deliver on some of their past issues, and being able to turn around and say we won't accept a planning application if you don't deal with that, I think is a good thing. Yeah, we shouldn't be saying no to that.
Yeah, I mean, I concur. I can think of large developers and also small householder type applications where they haven't done what they're supposed to do in the past. They haven't delivered on the promises. They may come back and ask for different things, or they've held up in another place. My only worry is how we would actually be able to justify it as a planning authority. But in principle, I completely agree. An applicant's past behaviour absolutely ought to be taken into account, because otherwise there's no deterrent. It's one of the few things you can actually do to get good behaviour from developers. Flo, you got your hand up?
It's just to say that I think this is one of these ones where actually what we perhaps ought to be saying is we need more detail. We can't actually make a decision based on the detail that we've got, because I can foresee there being sort of several issues with this. One is
Yeah, but this isn't about detail, it's in principle.
Yeah.
Do you agree in principle?
The mantra is every application should be dealt with on its own individual merits. And this is going against a principle that we have enshrined throughout our entire legislation in this country, which is that it's not retrospective generally. And I just wonder whether that might as a principle might be an issue, because we would have to, they'd have to sort out that every application being dealt with on its own individual merits if we were to have to take into account applicants' previous behaviours. I think
that's a good thing.
Yeah,
go on, Monique. I mean, I think it's a good thing if we do break that cherished statement.
So what I would like as part of that feedback, because I think many of us have sat in on either planning applications or through an appeal process where we've been told barefaced lies, and there should be a duty to tell the truth in these applications, and that actually writing an application down, you're writing down, is correct and truthful. Because there's one thing sitting in an inquiry and you know that if they told you it was black, you can look out the window and see it's white, and it's the complete opposite. Yet there is no duty to say, well, that's wrong, that's incorrect, blah blah blah. We have to take it as it stands, and I think that should be enshrined, and that actually we should force that through the consultation, make that point clear that if you write something on your form, you will be held to account on that, and if it's not done, then fundamentally you undermine yourself. I can't think of anything else, normally where you apply for things where if you did your tax return, you weren't exactly truthful, then the tax man will come after you. And I do think that principle should stand in planning.
Okay, there is a clear line here. I think that we would like the answer to number 30 to be yes. Is that the feeling we're getting?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
Yes. Okay. Can you? Well, we would like to see that question that reply modified, Jill.
Noted.
Noted. That's what I say when I don't agree with something. What about 31? There is, as Councillor Hall has said, Councillor Hunt has said, two options which aren't being put here, and we're not agreeing with either of them. Can you just remind us what those two options are? Yes. You're on question 50 odd there. Question 40.
Chapter 22.
Chapter 22. Question 38, 37.
It's got a
36.
22 next to it.
Yeah. So, chapter 22, we consider there are at least two potential ways to take account of this past irresponsible behaviour. Option 1, making such behaviour a material consideration when local planning is determined, so that any previous irresponsible behaviour can be taken into account. Option 2, allowing local planning authorities to decline to determine applications submitted by applicants who have demonstrated a track record. I think we're both would be quite useful. But it also says what past behaviour should be in scope, so we ought to respond to that bit as well. Option 2 allows us to decline to determine. Option 1 allows us to consider it a material consideration. Now, presumably, that would mean that it could be then a matter for, you would then turn it down on that basis, and it could be a matter for appeal. Whereas under option 2, they would have to basically appeal Addis or even JR our decision to decline the determination. So they are potentially different beasts, both of which I'd be quite happy to see in. What's your approach to this one, Flo?
I think it's a difficult one, because my personal opinion is option 1, making behaviour a material consideration. I think is I mean, actually looking at it, there's no reason why we couldn't support both options. They're not mutually exclusive.
No.
And I think if you were to go down this route of agreeing with it, that you would want to take account of both options and not have either or.
So Mike,
Monique,
on this one, I mean, I think we could say we both of them. And going back to our discussion earlier about trees, you know, we're all aware of where applications have come in. They've scrubbed out all the wildlife, and then we're given a fait accompli that we have to agree. I suppose can we in that instance say next time they come in with an application, we can say, sorry, we're not even going to accept that, because we know last time you scrubbed all the wildlife out, you ripped out all the hedges, you got rid of all the badgers that, you know, past behaviour.
Yeah, I mean, maybe so. I think if it has that potential, and it at least would allow us to, you know, fire a warning shot over others to say this is how we'll be approaching your applications in future. Richard?
What I was going to say about 2, because it does say after selecting the 2 options on question 31, are there any other mechanisms that you'd recommend? So certainly I think we should be saying we feel that both should be applicable. And the justification, are there any alternative mechanisms?
Is that generally the feeling, that we should say both are applicable?
Yeah, I mean, can we say on that one, I think it's quite important, is, you know, where we can see that things have been deliberately scrubbed out or removed prior to an application. Well, sorry, we're not going to deal with your application now, where you've denigrated the site. I mean, fundamentally, you know, this is the whole, goes back to telling the truth about what's gone on the site, because they'll say,
Well, there's some dreadful background noise somehow. I can't hear properly. Who's doing that?
Hopefully it's gone. Hopefully it's gone now.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, you know, where they say, oh, we've got an environmental you know, we've done our environmental studies, etc., and there's no problem. Well, there's no problem because you've ripped out all the you know, ecology. That should be one of our responses, is to say this is what we want to avoid. Or we shouldn't have to determine applications where we know that's been done.
Are we happy then that we ask the responses that we would like both of those options to be included? Are we happy with that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, we'll head if we can go along that line, Jill. Jill?
Thank you. Could I please ask if the working group would be comfortable with us adding some additional information about the resource to deal with this? Because actually, from an officer perspective, having the resources to deal with it is a considerable issue, and I think it's right that we raise it within that context.
Okay, but if you're not determining something, I'd have thought it was less response, but okay. Councillor Hunt, your next one.
Thanks. Yeah, and just coming back on that, I agree with the two, but I think if there is resourcing concerns and additional information that the government needs to bring forward on it, then we should be saying that.
Yeah.
But hopefully something can get sorted with it. And the last two that I've got is 35. Clarity on design requirements. I don't understand the response we're getting there, as it's unlikely to deliver greater compliance conditions. I think anything that we can do to ensure a better quality of design should be encouraged. And if we've got clear plans laying out exactly what should be being done in the beginning, and we are able to then better enforce that afterwards if that doesn't happen, I think that's a good thing. And the response there is saying, well, it isn't really. So happy to have my mind changed on that one, but I don't think it's the right response. And I'll just do the final one as well just now so I can shut up. Yeah, that's 37. And the question's just asking for ideas, but the response is just quite negative again. Challenging to deliver a good cover park design code for an area, but obviously the national policy, if there is things that can be done on small scale and we can give examples of that, we should be doing that and not just being negative about it.
Good point. Jill, can you extrapolate on your, that's not the right word, but anyway, on your responses to 35 and 37, please?
Yep. So I wonder actually how much of the response, because it's a combined response, it's not just me, it's other colleagues both in policy and in development management, is how we are sort of perhaps coloured around resource implications, because actually conditions should be clear, and if there's a breach of conditions, then it can be very expensive to say, right, you've got to tear that building down because you didn't do sort of X, Y, and Z. So quite often the starting point is what can be done to regularise the issues, and what action can be taken to sort of overcome sort of what's gone wrong. So I think sometimes when you're answering these questions, you've got a scenario in your head that's completely different to a scenario that somebody else might have. So no, but you know, taking the point, we can certainly frame that in a more sort of positive light, and ultimately it's about reinforcing good practice. So that's all I wanted to say really on the answer to 35. And for 37, it was really just about having a section in the design code about delivering BNG in addition to sort of
Which
other.
means, for those who can't recall it.
Oh, apologies. Biodiversity net gain.
Yep, carry on.
Yeah, so one way of overcoming the challenges of delivering biodiversity net gain would be to have the delivery of biodiversity net gain covered as part of your design code for an area. But if that's not sort of clear enough, very happy to take that away. And
it doesn't really reflect what this council has been pushing for and what councillors have been saying at the planning committee, does it? And it is something that we have been we are seeking to push. And yes, it can be challenging to deliver, but that's not what this is. This isn't our concern. You know, it might be challenging to deliver. That's the developer's concern. We want the government to be on our side in challenging the developers to be able to deliver this. If we're just going to keep responding saying, oh, that's hard to deliver, it's very hard on the developers. If we're taking the developers' side against the government, then we're not going to get anything better. We're not going to come forward with improved policies for the future. So I think this is kind of coming at it from very much the wrong approach. This is very, it's not reflecting what we as a council are hoping to see, what we as a council would like to see as policies that reflect what we want to deliver. So I think this is very much, we ain't here on behalf of developers. We want to see net biodiversity gain. We want to see improvements. We want to see greater design. And if the government says that's right, that's what we're going to introduce into policy, that's good, that's what we want, then developers have got to fall into line. It's when we're on our own saying we want this, we want to push for better biodiversity, and we don't have the government to back us up, we don't have the policies in national planning to back us up, that we fall down. But if we've got those policies, if they are there in the national policy, then that strengthens our hand. So yeah, this is an opportunity. I'm not sure our answers are going to make a great deal of difference, but I absolutely feel we should be responding on what we want to deliver, not worrying about whether or not it affects developers' ability to deliver. I don't know what others feel about that. Is everybody still awake?
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree.
Agreed. And I've got a couple of comments.
Okay, I mean, is that, is it on this, Monique?
Yeah.
Yep, go on then.
So on 35 about visual clarity, and one of the difficulties I think that we all face when we sit on planning is when we're given an outline application and then comes along later is the detailed one, and the detailed one we felt hasn't been up to scratch, or it isn't of great design, but we're told, well, they've already got outline, so you're not in a position to refuse. And I think that actually causes us a huge amount of difficulty. Those hybrid applications where you got like the access and is detailed and then the rest of it's up for grabs later, that causes a huge amount of frustration, because you don't know what you're going to end up with. All you know is you're giving the principle of planning, but you have no idea what you're going to get out of it, other than some, a number of houses or whatever it is that's going on there. In terms of the second point on 35 is when they say visual clarity on design requirements set out in the planning conditions, are they effectively asking that we employ an architect to transpose architectural details, specifics into, say you came up with condition 35 was about, how the roof tiles are configured and the edging detail with, on around a chimney or something, are we expecting to put that small piece of design sketch into the condition?
Jill?
I would have thought it would be the responsibility of the applicant to demonstrate what they're aiming to deliver. But I am not a development management planner, so I'd need to speak to my colleagues about that.
I think we need to get to the bottom of what they're really asking there, because to my mind, that's basically cutting out a bit of, rather than saying what we've said before is on drawing X, Y, Z, and then there's a myriad of different drawings, which when you're leafing through these massive applications, it's really difficult to keep track, especially when they get changed and superseded. I think what they're trying to do here is pin it down. So in the conditions, you're actually specifying more clearly what is required rather than referencing some number that may or may not be out of date. That would have a significant impact, I think, on resources. So we do need to make them aware of that. Is, you know, if we're going to have to employ people to do that, then, you know, so be it. But it would bring about a greater clarity.
Okay, Flo, what's what's your understanding here?
Thank you, Chair. I think this is another example of where there is insufficient detail in what's being proposed to allow us to actually determine what it is they're trying to do. Am I taking from what Councillor Bonney is saying that she would wish to see outline permissions done away with?
Well,
yeah,
I certainly would.
Yeah, I think we would, because I think a committee really wants to fully understand what it's signing itself up for when it gives permission, and when you've got outline, you actually have no idea, other than, you know, 550 houses plus X, and the rest of it will be in some design code that will be forthcoming at some point later.
Well, it's not even that, is it? They don't even. Sometimes you can't even get them to justify, but they can get that number of dwellings on a plot.
And then it you know, because we're having to go down the menu of what we want for section 106s, etc. You know, we're asking for a whole list of stuff when we don't really know what it is we're going to get in the first place. Yeah. I think it makes that a very difficult conversation, and why I think, you know, committees find those so difficult. I do think we should extract out of them saying, actually, you know, giving outline doesn't really help us in deliverability and certainty, which is what we're supposed to have.
Yeah, Flo?
I was just going to say we could, obviously I'll speak to Kerry, but we could amend our answer on this one to actually bring into our response the fact that we believe that outline permissions don't serve a useful purpose. So we could look at how we could word something along those lines, if that's what committee working group would like us to do.
Is that generally what people feel?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes. Yep, go for it.
Okay.
Okay. All right, James, is that your last one?
That was it, but I was just coming back on just from the discussion on that one.
Yeah.
And that was just my view on it from what has been said, and what is within that consultation document is that is about visual clarity, and even down to materials, and it's just seeing that very clearly and then putting it onto those conditions, so it is absolutely no way to try and say that it's something different. But I can understand, or I can see that how you wouldn't be able to get that sort of detail with it being an outline. So I can see that there would be a way to scrap outline altogether. I know that if the government did propose that, there would be a battle with developers and that, but it would make it so much better for us to have that clarity right in the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. Did you get all that, Jill? You comfortable with what we said, Jill and Flo?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
And the
Okay.
meeting's being recorded in any event, so we can always go back and
Oh, that's true, yes.
check if we need an aid memoir.
Okay, well, thank you for that contribution, Councillor Hunt. Very useful. I've got Alistair now.
I was just going to start with the last one on 37. I mean, I think where it says that there are national policy on small scale nature interventions, I mean, there are benchmarks on this and things that can be done. You know, it doesn't take very much to look on the internet to find good practice that could be rolled out. So I think it should be at a national policy level. I mean, things like sort of Swift boxes and B bricks, you know, it's just almost could be part of the building code. And I think if it is that, then it ceases to be an expensive addition because it's just what's done. So you know, that needs to be sort of just, you know, built in at a national level, so that is what places will do. In terms of the ones that I had questions about, one was.
Oh, hang on, let's just stick on that one. Can you incorporate that as well in 37, Jill and Flo? I think that's a very good point to give indications of what we would like to see and the reasoning behind it, because I think there was general disagreement with the response to 37. Well, it's nice to put some advice.
No, absolutely, and I think just to sort of give a bit of context, it was about BNG being challenging for us to deliver, not for developers to deliver, because there's real sort of issues around developing the
don't think we're convinced, Jill.
The matrix, you know, like how this is actually going to be delivered in practice. It's a huge challenge, and all the Kent authorities have pulled their resources to sort of pay for a post that will be sort of run and managed from KCC. But you know, absolutely that commitment's there. That's not that's not being questioned, and we will certainly reword that to make it come across much more positive.
Good.
And include those elements. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I was thinking particularly in question 8, where it mentions about infrastructure constraints, and I think, you know, it harks back to some of the discussion we've had on sort of water quality and water supply, that, you know, that actually these are constraints, and that we shouldn't necessarily assume that statutory providers can actually you know, meet the obligations that they have in the current climate change environment. So I think I'd like to sort of boost that up about infrastructure constraints, and I think the other thing is really that a definition of sustainability as being a constraint, as well as a sort of, what, you know, we're often told about the the idea that you should be able to meet your daily needs without the use of the private car, but that actually, you know, doesn't translate into reality for a lot of people, and I think that maybe we need to actually turn it on its head and look at sort of not doing the developments until those sort of things are in place. So it's sort of part of the infrastructure, but also a sort of isn't something you build, but a transport, public transport infrastructure that actually is workable for people rather than theoretically workable. I would like to see that incorporated if possible.
Yep. Flo?
I was just going to say, sort of going back, sorry, Councillor Gould, to your first point about building codes and so on. We have to bear in mind that what we're dealing with here is the NPPF and not the building regs, and what we might want to put in a cover letter potentially is something, a suggestion that the NPPF and changes to the NPPF can't stand on their own. We know that there has to be changes to primary and secondary legislation, and that one of those things ought to be incorporating things within building regulations that then will allow us to enforce. I think that's probably a reasonable point to make.
Would that be generally agreed that we incorporate that in a cover letter?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you for those still awake. Carry on, Flo.
No, that was really all I
Right.
I wanted to say on that one.
Okay.
So, well, what about Alistair's points on the wording of response to number 8?
I think it comes back to what is emerging as a very strong theme throughout our entire response. The lack of detail is quite debilitating in terms of our ability to have an idea of how we're going to make this work. So yes, criteria I think would be good, and clarity is always welcome. The other thing, sorry, I've just remembered what I was going to say, so I'm grateful for the chair for allowing me to wibble on a bit about this at the moment. When the NPPF came out in 2012, they had what they refer to as a golden thread running through it of sustainable development. And I can remember at a session that we had with PINS asking the then Chief Inspector, who's a chap called Keith Holland, what the NPPF meant by sustainable development. And he said it's paragraphs 1 to 284 of the NPPF. In other words, they didn't know. They had promised us earlier on, when there was going to be a planning bill under Michael Gove, right at the, way back in history, fairly recent history, he said that the government were going to provide a legal definition of sustainable development.
Oh yeah.
That's been dropped. That's never been mentioned since. So maybe that is something that we want to push for again in a cover letter, to say, are we going to get a much clearer definition of what constitutes sustainable development?
Can we put it in here?
Yeah.
I mean,
or we could put it in here.
Both.
I think a separate letter we might expect to reply to.
If I could just come in here, Chair. This is going back as a response from officers. You as members have much more freedom to make, quite frankly, political points in a cover letter that perhaps was to go out in your name. Now, we could help draft that.
Would you would members be agreeable to a cover letter going out in my name as leader of this, as chair of this group, reflecting some of the points that have been made?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. We shall work on that then, Flo.
Yes, yeah. If we draft something together, I think.
Right. There's two hands. There's still two hands. Alistair, you're in full flow. Let me not stop you further.
Right. Okay. Supplier specialist older people's housing. I mean, this is one. I mean, it's really just almost a question reflecting on what's happened in Faversham, where they put up an enormous care home and then had to close it because it wasn't built to the sort of building regulations, and it's been closed ever since. I mean, does the planning system have any sort of come back on when something like that happens? And because you've got to do these things properly, and if they're not, is there enforcement down the line for that sort of thing?
Flo?
Well, this is a particularly difficult one. In terms of enforcement, you have to look at the tests. Is it expedient? Is there an overwhelming public interest, etc.? But the other thing to bear in mind sometimes, and maybe I've got this wrong, and I'm quite happy to be corrected if I have got it wrong, but sometimes unscrupulous developers will put up a development in a certain use class, knowing that use class isn't going to succeed, and that they will then apply for change of use, you know, to go into general resi or something like that. We could look at whether the use classes ought to be more specific and the tests for getting a change of use ought to be more onerous, because members grant planning permission on the basis of the use class that is being applied for, and you might have a completely different opinion if an application were to come to you for market housing as opposed to specialist later living housing. I don't know.
Okay, I lost a lot of that because I went out. Is everybody happy with what's just been said?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. I've got hands. Monique.
Is Alistair finished?
I think so. The hand has gone.
Yep.
Yours is the sole hand now.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. When we talk about infrastructure and we talk about sustainability, a lot of it seems to be around, you know, we talk about sustainability is all around, I suppose, nature and how we interact with that, and what we do and don't demolish and reinforce. But part of the infrastructure, I think that Swale so clearly lacks, especially around Sittingbourne and on Sheppey, is around the NHS infrastructure. And I think the learning curve that certainly I've been on, and that many others have who don't work in the NHS system, is the lack of plan that we've had from our CCG historically, that they've actually implemented. And what we've learned is things like GP surgeries, just to get an extension, let alone a new one, takes 5 years. So that takes us through an entire plan period. And I think it's, if the government is really talking about levelling up, and this goes to the heart of their issue, is we can't be expected to deliver housing when we know fundamentally that the ICB is incapable of delivering sustained change in the NHS services locally. And I think actually that should be, when we talk about exceptional circumstances, we should be saying we have an exceptional circumstance because we have not had delivery. In fact, we've lost surgeries and we have actually substantially lost GPs in Sittingbourne and Sheppey. And actually, this should be a break whilst our NHS partners could continue to catch up or try to catch up before piling in a load more development. And I think that should be in our political letter, but I think it also should be in the officer one, because we talk about water companies not being able to deliver, you know, a reservoir within our plan period or whatever it is, you know, main sewer within the plan period. I think that should go wider. I mean, the classic, of course, is with education and the secondary school in Northwest Sittingbourne, and we haven't got a cat and hills chance of it coming forward in the next couple of years, and that's been on the table for now, what, about 5 years, I think, isn't it? And that's that one. Can you hear me?
Flo?
Yeah, sorry, if I can just come in on this one, Chair. Councillor Bolling, I think what you're asking for here is a number of different things, but one thing that I think that we could certainly incorporate, definitely in the officer response and potentially in the member response as well, is widening the definition of infrastructure to include social infrastructure such as healthcare facilities and youth facilities and so on and so forth, because that tends to get forgotten in all the discussions about infrastructure that are needed, particularly for larger scale developments. And so we might want to give some thought to that.
And I think it goes just beyond the large scale ones. It's where, you know, around towns you see an incremental everywhere. There's a little incremental. None of them contribute, but even where they do or don't contribute, it doesn't matter. because ultimately the party that is responsible has been incapable and is currently incapable of showing that it can deliver any uptick in services.
Chair, if I could respond to that one just a
Yep.
little bit. What we might want to give some thought to are the potential replacements for Section 106 and Community Infrastructure Levy. So this, what they were referring to as the National Infrastructure Levy before they realised what the acronym stood for. And they're now just referring to it as the Infrastructure Levy. When those changes come about, and they're not in, I think, Jill, I'm right in saying they're not in the current changes proposed in the NPPF, because that requires some significant legislative changes. But when it does, we ought to be looking at that.
I think we need
That's
to be
right.
able to compel.
Jill.
Sorry, carry on, Jill.
Apologies, through you, Chair. I was just
Yep.
confirming that there are no live consultations yet on the infrastructure levy, but I believe it is imminent.
Okay.
So I've got one
Yep.
more.
Go on.
But just to finish that off, I think what's really important is to show the history of what has happened specifically in parts of Swale, and to demonstrate that I mean, at the moment the ICB do not have a clear plan for Swale going forward. They say they're going to go through that, but that is part of the problem. But finally, the last bit was where we talk about on 38, we talk about best and most versatile agricultural land. I think we need to raise the flag there is that sometimes that has been deliberately run down. So although there might be a historic survey to say that this was best and most versatile agricultural land, and even if you did a new one, you might find bits fall out of it because it has been deliberately run down. I just don't want any bits to drop out that shouldn't do.
Okay. Richard?
Yeah, just going back on something that Monique and actually Flo alluded to, and I look at infrastructure, I mean, what, you know, it tends to be a road and a roundabout, and there are other things, but it's great to say, yes, we need a hospital, yes, we need more doctor surgeries, but also part of infrastructure, and I think this is where Flo said about the social aspect of it. If you haven't got the doctors and the nurses to put in them, it's pretty pointless building them. And it's strange, isn't it? We can put a Grampian condition where there's poor roads and no development can take place or be occupied until such time as this particular road junction has been improved. But why can't we turn around and say, well, until we have a good ratio of GPs to the residents of Swale, we shouldn't be accepting any more development. So infrastructure needs a good definition, because it could include teachers, medical staff, because if you don't have the social infrastructure for the community is not sustainable, and it's not a sustainable development. But how you put that across, that may be something better for a letter rather than trying to put into one of these answers. Thank you.
Okay.
Chair,
Flo.
if I could just come in on this one, Chair, thank you. Best and most versatile agricultural land was last really looked at as a national policy in 1984, when they introduced the changes between in grade 3. So you've got 2 subgrades in it, good and moderate. That was the last time that it was looked at, and I think that if there were to be another national resurvey, it would paint a very different picture because of precisely the sorts of things that members here have been talking about, development that's been built on best and most versatile agricultural land. Whether you'd want to put some comment to that effect in the member letter.
I think that would be
Agreed.
useful, yeah. Okay, well, thanks for that suggestion. I see no more hands, so I'll move the recommendation as per the paper, bearing in mind the changes that we've made and the proposal to write a member's letter explaining some of our concerns. Can I have a seconder,
Yeah.
please? And all those in favour?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Lovely. Well, thank you all very much. Very interesting, and we can't say we didn't do that one justice. So thank you all. Nothing else on the agenda, is there?
End of meeting.
Okay then. Thank you all, and good night.
Thanks,
Good night, all.
everyone.
Good night.
Bye.